Yes. What we wanted to do is find out more from the patients on what may be preventing them from participating in clinical trials. The actual session that I'll be moderating at the Bio International Conference is entitled Participant Sensitivity: Amplifying the Voice of the Patient in Clinical Trials. And what we did is work with a company to do the work called Insight and Measurement. And our contact there, David Harris, worked with us to conduct the survey over the last year in two different stages: a qualitative part that was done last summer, and then a bigger quantitative part that was concluded just a few weeks ago. It was. We submitted a protocol to an IRB with whom we've had to interact with before, with our customers, for whom we provide clinical trial support services. So the IRB did approve the approach that was used to make sure that there was no that it was ethical, and that we could do it in such a way that there was no PII released or in any way identifying the patients themselves. Everything was done anonymously. So the findings of the report, though we've worked in this space, Clincierge works in this space of providing support services, because all of our information is only anecdotal on what we experience ourselves. We were seeking to find a greater, statistical validation that, again, IRB approved, that we could use to inform the whole pharma biotech clinical trial sector on what the true perspective of patients is. So, for example, one of the big statistics is that 95% of patients have seriously considered dropping out due to the rigors or the cost of travel. So it's a huge issue. So companies need to consider, how do they improve their ROI on conducting clinical trials by considering these social factors that surround the patient's lives that they want in participating in the clinical trial. Well, yes. So let's say, put it this way, for some trials, and we know the term decentralized clinical trials, where caregivers may be able to go to the patient's home, or there are devices that can monitor health statistics and just transmit that data to a site. However, there are a lot of disease states for which that structure just does not work. So there are rigors of the patients having to go to sites, especially if it's a rare disease trial. And much of where we started was rare disease, where the patients and the research sites are geographically separated. And you have to figure out geographically, linguistically separated. You have to figure out how to overcome those barriers. And what we found out, it's interesting that question, what we discovered during COVID is that there were opportunities for us to help patients continue with their clinical trial regimen by reversing the travel and sending the clinical trial team to the patient's home for that particular visit. Yeah, it ties together with the travel, but the financial burden of participation can be enormous. Even if there's a reimbursement program in place, many cannot even afford the cost that the cost that they need to put out of pocket to begin with to either get to a site, whether it's big travel or whether it's just across town. Some families cannot afford to do that, or they can't afford to be away from their job in order to take a child to participate in a clinical trial. And sometimes for those children, the treatment, the regimen of the clinical trial may be the last option and maybe the only life-saving or life-enhancing treatment available to them at that point. So lots of social hurdles to overcome. I know thinking of another statistic, 65% of patients said that receiving reimbursements made it a lot easier to remain in a clinical trial. But 1 in 3 said it's taken a month or more to receive reimbursement while participating in a trial. And that's where the Clincierge model that we've created tries to avoid that by us prepaying as much as possible on behalf of the patients so that they have the very, very least out of pocket. A very important point, because that's the beginning of all of this. So what we've seen, and we have an experience with one of our early clients, that that biotech company was competing against others in the same space for the same pool of patients working on the same disease state. Our particular client started later in their process to recruit patients. However, they had our services available for these patients. They were able to recruit faster, retain patients at a higher level, and actually beat the competition to market. So they were successful. They were able to submit for FDA approval, and they were able to bring this new treatment to market. And a lot of what they attribute is the Clincierge services that help them recruit faster, retain at a higher level, and thus contain the timeline and the budget for their clinical trial. So the statistics on that are that 100% of patients, and in the survey, we also separate out, we surveyed patients and we surveyed caregivers. And for both of those populations, 100% of them said that it was extremely important to have someone with whom they could connect for planning the logistics for each of their site visits. Someone who was linguistically aligned, culturally aligned, time zone aligned. So for us, that means our staff within that country where the patient lives interacts with the patients and caregivers to coordinate each of their site visits and coordinates with the site, the communication between the site to coordinate each of those visits. That is certainly our hope, that this information that we're going to present will help them better understand this aspect of it. I mean, we know that they focus on the treatment at the site, but here are the things that are outside of the site that may have been outside of their vision for so long. And here are some ways, here are some things, here's what they're saying. Here's what the patients are saying on how we need to be treated, how we want to be treated, so that we can participate. And by the way, the study also shows how eager they are to participate, what they consider the importance of their role in the research of new treatments for others who may be suffering from the same disease state.